Boiling to death, a slow and agonizing punishment, this method traditionally saw the victim gradually lowered, feet first, into boiling oil, water, or wax. If the shock of the pain did not render them immediately unconscious, the person would experience the excruciating sensation of their outer layers of skin, utterly destroyed by immersion burns, dissolving right of their body, followed by the complete breakdown of the fatty tissue, boiling away beneath. It seems safe to assume that such a horrendous fate, one of the worst execution methods ever devised, would be reserved for the foulest of murderers, but historical documents refute this. The Emperor Nero is said to have dispatched thousands of Christians in this manner, while in the Middle Ages, the main recipients of the punishment were not killers or rapists but coin forgers, particularly in Germany and the Holy Roman Empire. In Britain, meanwhile, King Henry VIII introduced the practice for executing poisoners. Shockingly, the practice is believed to have been carried out as recently as 2002, when the government of Uzbekistan, led by Islam Karimov, was alleged to have tortured several suspected terrorists to death in this manner. The blood eagle, a technique ascribed to ancient Norse warriors, the blood eagle mixed brutality and poetic imagery in a way that only the Vikings could. First, the victim's back would be hacked open and the skin ripped apart, exposing the spinal column. The ribs would then be snapped from the spine and forcibly bent backwards until they faced outwards from the body, forming a pair of bloody, shattered eagle's wings. As a horrifying finale, the lungs would then be pulled from the body cavity and coated with stinging salt, causing eventual death by suffocation. There is some question as to whether this technique was ever actually used, as the only accounts come from Norse literature. Several scholars claim that the act we know of today is simply a result of poor translating, and misunderstands the strong association of the eagle with blood and death in Norse imagery. That said, every account is consistent in that in each case, the victim is a nobleman being punished for murdering his father. The good news for any poor soul who might have suffered this indignity, the agony and blood loss from the initial wounds would probably have caused them to pass out long before the lungs were removed from their bodies. Impalement, most famously used by Vlad the Impaler, 15th century ruler of Wallachia, in present-day Romania, an inspiration for Count Dracula. The act of impalement has a long, grim history. While images tend to depict people skewered through the midsection and then held aloft, in a manner that would almost certainly bring about a rapid death, the real process was a much longer, horrifically drawn-out ordeal. Traditionally, the stake would be partially sharpened and planted, point up, in the ground. The victim would then be placed over the spike as it was inserted partway into the rectum or vagina. As their own body weight dragged them further onto the pole, the semi-greased wooden stake would force its way up through their body, piercing organs with an agonizing slowness as it eventually penetrated the entire torso, finally tearing an exit wound through the skin of the shoulder, neck or throat. The earliest records of the torture come from 1772 BC in Babylon, where King Hammurabi ordered a woman be executed in this way for killing her husband, but its use continued until as recently as the 20th century, when the Ottoman government employed the technique during the Armenian genocide of 1915 to 1923. According to some accounts, it could take the victim, exposed, bleeding, and writhing in tormented agony, as long as 8 whole days to die. Keelhauling, walking the plank might not be the most pleasant of deaths, but it seems moderately more humane than the other favored maritime punishment of keelhauling, a punishment that often ended in death due to the severity of the wounds sustained, or was simply carried out until the point of death. It saw the victim, legs weighted and suspended from a rope, dropped from the bow of the ship and then rapidly pulled underwater along the length of the hull, and over the keel, the beam that runs longitudinally down the center of the underside of the ship, hence the name, to the stern. In the age of wooden sailing ships, the hull of a vessel would normally be coated in a thick layer of barnacles, whose shells could be rock hard and razor sharp. As the drowning sailor was yanked relentlessly through the salt water, these protrusions would strip the skin from his body, gouging out raw chunks of flesh and even, by some accounts, tearing off whole limbs or severing the head. If the sailor was still alive, they might be hung from the mast for 15 minutes before going in again. In some cases, the victim would have an oil-soaked sponge, containing a breath of air, stuffed into their mouth to prevent a merciful drowning. Employed mostly by the Dutch and the French from the 1500s until it was abolished in 1853, accounts of its use date back as far as Greece in 800 BC. The Roman candle. Many of the very worst execution methods ever devised involve fire, from burning witches at the stake in medieval Britain to roasting criminals alive in the searing metal insides of the brazen bull in ancient Greece, but few matched the sheer lack of humanity as the Roman candle. A rumored favorite of the mad Roman Emperor Nero, this method saw the subject tied to a stake and smeared with flammable pitch, then set ablaze, slowly burning to death from the feet up. What sets this above the many other similar methods is the fact that the victims were sometimes lined up outside to provide the lighting for one of Nero's evening parties.